Life-changing and even life-ending allergies are on the rise among our kids, something we need to be aware of for our families and those of our kids' friends. The team at Allergy Amulet has devised a contraption that helps detect even trace elements of the most dangerous allergens, and they've sent Meg to talk to us about it and about allergy safety in general. If you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe, and do come find us on Facebook or sign up at Patreon for early access and members-only goodies. Thanks for watching. Now let's get to work. I'd like to introduce you all to two close personal friends of the show. John and John are a pair of law enforcement officers with 3 decades of combined experience in helping people stay safe and what happens when that fails. They've built a shop, Shield Protection Products, that offers a full range of self-defense items like pepper spray and stun guns that real people can use in the real world. They're like-minded folks, so they also offer important safety equipment like fire extinguishers, medical kits, and car escape tools. They provide an instructional video with every purchase so you know how to use anything you buy. Find them at shieldprotectionproducts.com and use the discount code SFOTB10 to get 10% off of your purchase. That's SFOTB10 at shieldprotectionproducts.com. Seriously, friends, if you're looking for the best equipment to keep your family safe, along with advice from knowledgeable professionals on how to use it, while supporting this show and a small business that deserves it, you'll find it at Shield Protection Products. Go check them out and tell them Safest Family on the Block sent you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. I'm your host, Jason, and joining me today is Meg Nohe of Allergy Amulet. Hello, Meg.
Hello, thanks for having me today.
Thank you for coming on. Now, Meg has 15 years of experience working at branding agencies and account management with medical devices and therapeutics. She led the launch of multiple first-of-its-kind medical devices and is a certified aller coach, former president of Food Allergy Partners, the Midwest's only food allergy and intolerance consulting practice. She has a daughter with peanut and tree nut allergies and herself has intolerances to gluten, dairy, and citrus. And she is now the driving force behind Allergy Amulet, which is a child safety tool that I'm excited to bring to more people's attention. So I guess that's where we start. What is Allergy Amulet and how did it happen?
Yeah, so you kind of summed up my whole life there. That was great. I love it.
You wrote the bio.
So Allergy Amulet kind of came to fruition several years back. We have 2 co-founders. Our CEO, Abigail Barnes, has lived and managed food allergies since childhood. She says down to only 3 allergies: peanuts, tree nuts, and shellfish, but there were many, many more when she was a child. So when she was finishing a dual law and master's program at Vermont Law School and Yale, she was introduced to a chemistry professor at Dartmouth who had started a company to detect for nicotine and marijuana in public places like hotels. And she had heard about this technology he used called molecularly imprinted polymers to detect these things. So she approached him and just said, hey, I've had this idea for this device that can help you tell if your food allergen is in your food. I read about your technology. Do you think this would be a viable application? I'd love to meet and discuss. And he got back to her and said, actually, I think it would be a great application. And by the way, I have severe tree nut allergies. And so it was just kind of a serendipitous, that was kind of the first kickoff, and fast forward to now. And we had a successful pre-order round in January, and we will be fully on the market at the end of the year. So very excited with where we're going.
Now it sounds like, is this technology similar to, when you travel and for some reason you get randomly chosen to check your bag for explosives and there were that little paper across it, and apparently it changes color in the presence of certain explosive compounds. Is that kind of the technology we're talking about here?
I mean, definitely less random, more purposeful, but I like the analogy. So you have, with the amulet, you have 2 components. You have a sampler, which is where you put a sample of your food. And then you have a reader, which is about the size of a USB drive. And that is what reads the sample. So essentially you put a sample of your food in the sampler, you plug it into the reader, so the food never actually touches the reader component or the sensor. And then that'll tell you in around a minute if your allergen is present in your food.
Oh, wow.
So you do have to know what your allergen is. So for example, with my daughter, we go to a restaurant. She has, you mentioned earlier, she has allergies to peanuts and tree nuts. So we'd go to a restaurant and say, okay, we want to just make sure that the food that she's about to eat doesn't have peanuts in it. So for consumers that are using our sensor, you still kind of take the same due diligence measures that you would any other time when you've had food allergies and you're eating foods prepared by others. So you're still probably going to alert the wait staff, maybe talk to the chef, have your emergency medicines ready just in case anything happens. But this is kind of another tool in your tool belt, so to speak, that then once the food gets to your table, you can take a sample and have that, a little bit more confidence that you've done everything you can to ensure that you're not ingesting your allergen.
Okay. Now, I get the sense just very generally that either food allergies are on the rise or we're detecting them early enough to save lives more often. But I would imagine that you have at your fingertips some actual statistics on food allergies in children and safety. And I'd love, could you share a few of the most important with us?
Yeah, so several years ago, research came out that we thought 15 million Americans had food allergies. And at the time, we thought that was a lot. And then a couple of years ago, newer research came out and discovered that actually 32 million Americans have food allergies. And the statistic that I think really puts it into perspective for a lot of people is that breaks down to 1 in 13 children or 2 kids in every standard American classroom and 1 in 10 adults. So I think a lot of people knew, okay, it's increasing and it's on the rise with children. But I think also what a lot of people were surprised to hear is how prevalent it is with adults, because really food allergies can come on at any time, and same with intolerances. So myself personally, 10 years ago, I had no food allergies or intolerances. Fast forward to now, over the past 7 years, I've developed intolerances to milk and or dairy, all dairy and citrus about 5 years ago. And then about a year and a half ago, I started getting symptoms to gluten and discovered I have a gluten intolerance just in November, actually. So it definitely is on the rise.
And so it sounds like it is a fact of it. People are being allergic to food more often and even developing food allergies later in life, rather than the hypothesis that it's just that we're saving the population that we're identifying now would have just died from their allergy 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago.
Right. Or people didn't
Okay.
realize, they might have a stomach ache. I think one of the, I think there's always positives to negative scenarios. And I think one of the positives is there's a brighter light that's shining on food allergy now. And so people are more aware of what they're ingesting, what they're putting in their body, and how it's affecting their body. So I think, for people like myself with an intolerance, I was having kind of brain fog after eating dairy and citrus. And I don't know, had I not been so aware of this industry at this point, I probably would have pinpointed it to something else. I don't think I ever would have realized that it was because of food. And once I cut out those foods, I realized that was the culprit. So I think that is one of the benefits is if you have food allergies or intolerances in today's world, there is a lot more information out there, better management and treatment options, and a lot better food alternatives than we had in past.
So not unlike what happened with ADD and autism spectrum disorders starting in the late 1990s, where before that, we would have just written the kid off as bad or weird. And we just become more educated and enlightened as a society, and we're able to look more closely. Okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when my daughter was first diagnosed with allergies, I talked to one of our friends' moms that her son is our age now. He's pushing 40, but she said, I know this is really tough to wrap your head around, but she said, just be so grateful you have a child in the 2000s with food allergies, as opposed to one in the 80s when I told his preschool he had a peanut allergy. They looked at me like I had 3 eyeballs. I mean, they had no idea what to do with him. Whereas now that's not the case.
Let alone in the 1700s when your kid just wouldn't have made it.
Yeah. I mean, serious things can happen. I mean, food allergies, not always, but they can be fatal.
So you're using 2 words a lot, allergy and intolerance. Now, is that a matter, is there a difference between those things degree, or are there qualitative differences between those two states?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'll be the first to say I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but generally speaking, when you have a food allergy, it's what they call IgE mediated. So if you put it in the simplest terms in your body sees the food, it goes into attack mode. Your immune system starts to attack it, and it has a potential for being fatal. It doesn't mean that it always will, but it can get to that point. Whereas if you have an intolerance, it's what they call IgG mediated within the body, and you can have a lot of the same symptoms, and they can be severe symptoms, but it's never going to get to the point where it's life threatening. So
Mm.
if my daughter were to eat nuts, hers could become very serious and life threatening. If I eat the things that I have an intolerance to, while I can have severe symptoms, there's no chance that it would become fatal.
Okay. So if, for example, you're an educator or your child's friends spending the night, knowing the difference between an allergy and an intolerance can literally be life-saving.
Yeah, and I would even say,
Mhm.
one of the challenges too is there are varying degrees, even with food
Mhm.
allergy, of comfort level and how people manage it.
Mhm.
So, some people, their allergy might be so severe that if on a packaged product it says, okay, there are no nuts in the ingredients, but it was packaged on a shared line or in a shared facility with nuts,
Mm.
some families might say, we can't even go there. Like if it's even been in the vicinity with nuts, we can't do it. Whereas some might say, we've never had an issue with that. We are comfortable as long as it's not a major ingredient.
Mhm.
Some people are comfortable going out to dinner, some are not. And so there is, a very wide spectrum of comfort. And I think the biggest thing is just asking questions and understanding that comfort.
Almost as if listening to people is a good way to keep them safe.
Imagine that, right? It's a good lesson in everything in life.
Now, if I'm a new parent, or apparently this is something I learned today, that we can develop food allergies later in life, uh, and I'm suspecting that there's a food allergy, or just being vigilant for food allergies in my children. What are some of the earliest warning signs to look for?
That's a great question. I think, like I mentioned, everyone's a little bit different with their allergies. And so when my daughter was a baby, we found out when she was 1 about her allergies. But as
Hmm.
early as I can remember, when she was maybe 3 or 4 months old, she had mild eczema on her body, which we now know is not always related to food allergy, but it can be an early warning sign. She always had blowout stools. I mean, any parent knows every baby has those from time to time, but she constantly had them. We removed dairy and soy, which are common allergens in babies, and it just didn't stop. And so once we found out she had food allergies, looking back, I can pretty confidently say it was probably because she was getting all of the nuts I was eating through breast milk,
Hmm.
but we didn't know. And every child is going to react differently. So for example, I mean, if you have a true food allergy, it can affect breathing, your intestinal tract, your heart, or your skin. So the symptoms kind of run the gamut of you can have a barking cough or diarrhea or stomach pain or itching in your mouth, dizziness and lightheadedness. I know with my intolerances, that's kind of the key culprit is I get very lightheaded. Even a strange taste in your mouth, swelling or hives. And so it kind of runs the gamut. And kind of one of the tricky parts that we discovered because of my daughter is that every reaction can look differently too. So she has had one severe reaction where she had a hacking cough and her throat was closing. And then she had another where her face was swelling and she had hives all over her body. And so just knowing, I think the biggest thing is that it can look really different, it can present differently, and it can affect kind of those different systems in the body, not just one or two. Um, I think it never hurts to just kind of be aware and then ask your doctor about it if you have any concern, because then at that point they can help you determine the best, protocol or course of action because,
Yeah.
they could do testing or whatnot if needed.
All right. So listen, if you've gotten this far into the show, you like what I'm doing here. So do I, but I need your help to make it all it can be. For just a dime a day, you can help this happen by supporting the show on Patreon. In return, you'll get my undying thanks, early access to episodes, a monthly safety worksheet, and other cool goodies. We're at patreon.com/safestfamily and waiting for your help. Please consider it. It's $3 a month to you, but a big deal to me. And kind of on that topic, it seems like the pendulum swings back and forth almost every 2 years about with a baby whether you should just not give them the big allergens in case they're allergic, or that not giving them the big allergens early on contributes to allergies later on. What's the current thinking on that?
You are absolutely right. In 2014, a huge study came out. So back then, I would say I'll back up a little bit. Before 2014, at that point, they would say if you have any risk factors for developing allergies in your children, avoid, the most common allergens. So the top 9 most common in today's world that contribute to 90% of reactions are peanut, tree nut, fish, shellfish, wheat, egg, milk, soy, and sesame. So they would say avoid those the first year. In 2014, a huge study came out where they followed infants for 5 years, and infants were either given peanut very early, starting at maybe 5, 6, 7 months old, through the first 5 years of their life. So early and consistently, versus children that were not given peanut at all during that 5-year span. And what they found is the children that received peanut early and often had far less likelihood of developing peanut allergies. And so at that point, 2014 was this big shift of, we got to change this up. Now we know that early introduction and consistent introduction is important. And so usually in today's world, of course, if you have a family that's predisposed, has severe asthma or seasonal allergies or food allergies, you might proceed with caution and work with your doctor to find the best plan. But generally speaking, it's now considered early introduction is super important, which I will say between my 2 children, one was born in 2012 and one was born in 2014. And it was a very big mind shift in a 2-year period.
Yeah, I notice that happens with a lot of hot topics, that the expert advice changes every few years as we get more information. But it sounds like this most recent study has some strong methodology and sample size that means it's probably going to last a little longer than a couple of years.
Yeah, the American Academy of Pediatrics now supports that philosophy. So I think it has staying power for sure.
Outstanding. Now, in terms of if I suspect my child has a food allergy, you're saying we can go to the doctor and they'll do tests probably similar to the hay fever tests that have been around for 30 or 40 years and systematically figure it out. And that I assume that we should do that instead of trying to do it at home, like standing by with an EpiPen in one hand and 3 kinds of nuts in the other and taking notes.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend consulting your doctor on the best protocol, whether, if they're not at high risk, they may advise you to try it at home and kind of watch and see how it goes. But if you are higher risk, they might say, let's do some testing first. They can either do testing where they prick skin on the back and see if a little bump grows when it's exposed to the allergen, versus they can also do blood testing. And that's just another good kind of data point to have to make a more educated decision on how do we proceed with this. But again, depending on your risk factors or non-risk factors, kind of consulting your doctor is the best first step in kind of deciding what your plan will be.
No, that makes very good sense. And if you're a parent with a child with food allergies, go into the doctor, follow the doctor's advice, ask the expert, do what the expert says, tends to work in most situations. But if I'm a parent and my child's best friend has a peanut allergy, or I'm coaching the chess team or the baseball team, and I know there's a kid on the team who's got an allergy, what are some of the most important steps that we can take to make sure that kid is safe and also comfortable and not like singled out?
Right. I would say the number one thing, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is food allergy parents, for the most part, I don't want to speak for all, but I would say a lot of us greatly appreciate when people ask questions. We don't expect, just like there are so many disorders and issues and things that people manage at home, we don't expect everyone to fully understand it and be educated. But when people ask questions because they want to be inclusive, it makes me so happy and feel so grateful that my child is being included in whatever is going on for team sports or banquets or school birthday parties or things like that. So asking questions, number one for sure. I would just say also, when you are a food allergy family or an individual with food allergies, it can be really taxing mentally, physically, and financially. And so as much as we are able to plan ahead is great. I mean, I remember birthday parties where I had to, the family told me what cupcakes would be there. If I wasn't comfortable with the bakery they were coming from, if I knew a week in advance that they were serving vanilla cupcakes, I could make one for my daughter at home and bring it with her so that she didn't feel singled out. So, you can't be a spur of the moment sometimes with food allergies, and that's one of the hard things. And so pre-planning is always very, very appreciated.
So tell them early, tell them often, accommodate them as much as they can. And then what are some things, one of the things that concern me is, for example, a coach in my kid's school, is if there's a child in the class who has a food allergy and something happens, I'm sure that parents know specific things to look for that we might not because it's not our child. Are there things to look for? Or is it like you talked about earlier, the symptoms are so broad and wide that it's not the best possible question?
You know what, the symptoms are very wide, but I think it's really helpful if you ask, like, let's say that child is coming to your child's birthday party and the parents aren't staying. Ask that family when they drop the child off, are there symptoms we need to watch for? Do they have emergency medicines with them that they need to carry with them? Because a lot of food allergy kids do. And if so, what do we need to know? I mean, so there have been times where I will drop my daughter off for an all-day camp and I'll go 15 minutes early and I'll spend time with the counselor saying, here's the contents of her medical bag. She likely won't need it because we've been through the food, we know the plan, but just in case she does, she has a food allergy action plan that spells out, if you see this, this is what you do. If you see these symptoms, do this. And a lot of, especially food allergy families with children, a lot of them have those. And that's kind of, even for the parents, that's kind of our guidebook of, okay, here's what I'm seeing, how do I take action? So asking what they need to be prepared for. And that's also, I mean, I would say the families should take onus of that too. That's very much, when it's my child, that's my responsibility to kind of vocalize those things too. So I think it's so helpful when families ask, but the family with the food allergies needs to be the one initiating and helping take the load off.
That makes sense. Sounds like we recommend that families we have a list for what families should keep in the car, including a first aid kit. And that first aid kit should include a couple of doses of any medication the family needs. It sounds like keeping just that emergency response list, that emergency medication list or instructions about the kid, printing out a bunch of copies and keeping those in the car with you as a parent might be very helpful. So even if you weren't expecting it, you can whip it out real quick and have the conversation, send it and give it to whichever adult is in charge.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And I always keep, so my daughter, now that she's getting a little bit older, is really pushing for independence. And so I let her pick out a purse that she loves because she didn't really want to carry her emergency medicines. And epinephrine is temperature sensitive. So it can't be left in a car or left baking in the sun or put in a freezer. I mean, I don't know why you put it in a freezer, but you're supposed to keep it as close to room temperature as you can. So I usually keep a purse with all of her medicines, that action plan that we talked about, a copy of her insurance card, anything anyone might need in an emergency scenario so that they're as well equipped as they can be.
Okay. Wow. It reminds me of before I did this for a living, I ran a martial arts school and we had a kid who got stung by a bee on an outing. I said, "Hey, are you allergic to bees?" Like, "Yeah, I'm allergic to bees." So we, of course, panic, can't get the kid's dad on the phone. I'm driving as fast as I can safely towards the hospital. When the dad finally calls me back and says, no, he's allergic to grapes.
Oh no.
Grapes, not bees, grapes. And it just gives him a tummy ache. And avoid it. Better communication than that seems to be the key that we're talking about here.
Yeah. And that's where I say, like, that's also up to the food allergy families to be the ones to accurately communicate. And it's a fine balance. You don't want to scare the host, but you also want to have open communication so they know exactly what the allergens are and what to expect. Because I can imagine when you didn't know, like when you thought that he had that allergy, that was probably a very scary feeling.
It was like, what am I gonna do? And we had EpiPens in the emergency kit, but I wasn't gonna stab a kid with an EpiPen that I didn't have to.
Yeah.
I wasn't comfortable doing that either. But anyway, but that idea of communication. It's interesting on this show how much of a through line of identifying potential risks, communicating those risks effectively, and having a plan before the emergency, how universal that is good sense, whether you're talking about food allergies, home invasions, or mental health.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, communication, you're right, is kind of the through line for everything.
Yeah. Now, you touched on this a little bit earlier when we were kind of introducing the concept, but how does Allergy Amulet help for families that have food allergies?
It's another, I kind of picture it, you don't wear a superhero tool belt when you have food allergies, but I kind of picture this fictitious tool belt, right? Of like, I have some people carry allergen cards that say their name and their allergy. They can kind of pass back to a chef at a restaurant. Some people have their emergency action plans, like I mentioned, their medications. They'll check a restaurant ahead of time online or call ahead to see what might be safe. This is just adding another tool to that arsenal to keep you from hopefully having to get to the point where you have a reaction.
Mhm.
So it's adding that preventative measure that if you can take a sample of your food and confidently say, it is a representative sample, that's something you have to keep in mind. You're not testing the entire dish. But if you can take, the part you're the most worried about in your meal and test it and confidently know down to very, very tiny amounts that allergen is not present, it's just adding arsenal to that tool belt.
It's an additional line of defense, an additional tool for our use.
Right. And because as of right now, there's no cure for food allergies. And
Mhm.
so there are a lot of management tools starting to
Mhm.
come out and preventative tools starting to come out to help us best manage as much as we can. And I will say, even the 8 years that I've been a food allergy family,
Mhm.
it's gotten easier and easier because technology and communication is
Mhm.
catching up with the industry.
Yeah. Now, you had mentioned something when talking about some of your partners, that one of them had extincted, recovered from, cured, fixed, or
Mhm.
lost. I'm not sure what the word is. Some of her allergies. Is that a thing that can be done on purpose? And if so, is that something that parents can work with, or is that something we should leave to doctors?
That's a really good question. I mean,
Mhm.
so it's a kind of a tricky question too, because
Mhm.
certain allergens statistically are outgrown more than others. And it
Mhm.
also depends on when you develop them. So, for example, dairy is an allergen that's really common in young kids that statistically you have a decent chance of outgrowing.
Mhm.
It's not a guarantee. I do know some adults that still have dairy allergies. However, if you have a peanut allergy or a tree nut allergy, it's a much smaller chance that you'll outgrow it. Usually, those allergens versus dairy or soy are lifelong. Again, not to say I also know people that had peanut allergies that outgrew those. So it's kind of one of those you just kind of have to watch. That said, there's a newer treatment on the market called what we call OIT in the industry, or oral immunotherapy. And the first drug, which is literally peanut powder in kind of a pill form, that came onto the market, was approved last year for peanut allergy. And basically, so OIT, my daughter went through OIT for peanut and tree nut allergies. And the concept is really simple if you think about it. It's taking a tiny, tiny, minute amount of that allergen and starting it at small amounts consistently and titrating up over time. So we
Mhm.
spent, 8 months starting her at the tiniest amount of peanut flour and doing that for a week. And then the next week we would titrate up to a little bit more peanut flour until, a few months in, we were at whole peanuts. That said, there's no perfect cure. It's not a cure for food allergies. It's a way to hopefully get your immune system to tolerate those allergens so that you get to a point where it's, oh, I accidentally bit into a peanut cookie. It should be okay, but I just need to kind of be calm and hang out and make sure that nothing happens, as opposed to, oh my God, where's the EpiPen? We have to get to the hospital now.
So
Um,
not so much a cure as developing a tolerance the way that an alcoholic or a drug addict does.
Right.
Or like Wesley did with Iocane powder in The Princess Bride.
There you go.
Right.
Yes. I actually just saw The Princess Bride for the first time last year, so I know what you're talking about. I know. I'm very late to the game.
And we just did that with our 11-year-old 2 weeks ago, so it's fresh in my mind as well.
Yeah, there you go. Yes. So with my daughter, for example, she has not outgrown her allergies. She still, we blood test her every year, and she still technically tests in allergic ranges, but she does eat several peanuts a day as kind of a maintenance dose. And so we know she's kind of at a point where if she were to accidentally eat one and not realize it, in theory, she should be okay. But the immune system is a tricky thing. We don't know if she were to stop her maintenance dose, if they would, come back full speed, or if she's sick and her immune system's down and she ate them, would she still react to them? For example, she was at a friend's house yesterday swimming, and all of a sudden broke out her whole body in hives. And the only thing she had eaten was a cookie from a friend that I hadn't seen, which was a good lesson for her. And making sure you check labels. But we found out it was from a peanut and tree nut free facility. And so we still don't know what it was from. And so, it's another tool in your tool belt. It's a great management tool. Not everyone qualifies for oral therapy, just depending on, it's a big time commitment. You have to have well-controlled allergies and asthma. There is either a copay or a cost for it at this point. So there are barriers to entry also. But yes, another tool, absolutely.
Well, Meg, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. I think this information is going to be very, very helpful for both parents whose children have allergies and parents who want to be more accessible and more helpful for families that do. Remind us again, Allergy Amulet is not yet out officially to the public, but is coming out by the end of the year?
Yeah, by the end of the year. So on our website, allergyamulet.com, if you sign up for our newsletter, we send it out probably quarterly, so not a lot. That's where we will be alerting people of kind of the date of the shop is open.
Okay.
We did a round of pre-orders in January, but the shop will officially open towards the end of 2021.
Outstanding. And finally, what's a really smart question I should have asked you but haven't?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe my other child, I mentioned, we gave him all the allergens in 2014 when we found out about that shift with the LEAP study I mentioned. So when he was 9 months old, we officially carefully introduced him to all major top 9 allergens, and knock on wood, today he has no food allergies. So it's not to say that, she has allergies because we didn't introduce them and he doesn't because we did, but it is an interesting, it is interesting to look at that shift of kind of how we introduce foods and who has allergies and who doesn't.
Right. So it's another point of data among many.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so just kind of reiterating that support for the current thinking that we shouldn't avoid giving kids allergens early unless we have some kind of family history or medical history that suggests we should.
Right.
Because we might be doing more harm than good.
Right. And as always, I think it's a good idea to always talk to your pediatrician, even if you don't have risk factors in your family, just to run by kind of the plan and say, here's what we're thinking about doing. Do you support this? Would you suggest we do it differently? And kind of take a team approach, just like you do with everything else of, hey, when do we bump them up to the next size car seat? It's just one other question I would add to your list, when you go to the checkups of, how and when do you think we should go about this?
Well, that makes good sense. Well, Meg, again, thank you so much for coming on today. And we'll put the links to Allergy Amulet down there in the show notes. And maybe we'll exchange a couple emails before the episode comes out, and find some other resources, some good websites for information for our viewers. And thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. It was fun. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Meg.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Today's episode was brought to you by our heroes over at Patreon: Todd Elner, Beth Edwards, Douglas Sedevy, Hugh O'Donnell, Art Brick, American Institutes of Kenpo, Beth Pratt, Richard Hubbard, Wayfinder Advantage, Kit Bradley, Lee Douglas, Amy Rivers, Neil Fastine, Kate Carlson, Brom Payton, Jenny Coakley, and Chris Jordan. Join the illustrious heroes by backing us at patreon.com/safestfamily. If you can't, that's okay, but do consider liking us and subscribing here on YouTube or sharing your favorite episodes on social media. Even a little bit on your end can make a lot of difference here. Thank you for watching today. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.